So the theme of my talk, as Michael mentioned, is spiritual reading. And I thought that it would fit in well with this Third Ray Conference and the theme that the Seven Ray Institute has chosen, which is Forerunners of the Light. Because the theme of spiritual reading comes from one of the great forerunners, the ancient sage from India, Patanjali, who we're told 11,000 years ago put forth into writing what had been an oral tradition of spiritual training. And we're told that that training has been very effective over the years and now will be serving the needs of the spiritual hierarchy for the next 7,000 years. So although many forms of spiritual training are extant in the world today, people in the West in particular are always looking for something new and faster, perhaps, and more novel in some ways. We are told that the spiritual hierarchy of the planet advocates for the use of the training of the Raja Yoga system, which is the system put down by Patanjali. For it gives us a roadmap to follow. There's so many intricacies on our third ray planet, so many byways, so many paths that sometimes lead to cul-de-sacs or dead ends or to obscuration. But if we can utilize the tools of the Yoga Sutras, which they're called, it gives us a guideline and a roadmap to follow, hence its effectiveness. The subjects of the sutras are mind control, how to use the mind and make it an instrument of the soul through the application of this kingly science, Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga provides the means whereby the mind can be illumined and made aware of those things from the soul realm. The sutras are a collection of 196 aphorisms, short sayings. And it's one of the 3 books that was advocated by the Tibetan that all spiritual seekers should study. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the teaching in the Bhagavad Gita, and the teaching of the New Testament. He said those 3 should be under all of our belts. And although the sutras were quite popular during their earlier centuries in the East, we're told that they were lost completely between the 12th and 19th centuries. For 700 years, they disappeared. And they were only discovered and popularized again and brought to the West by the great sage Swami Vivekananda and the Theosophical Society. So it's really rather recently that they've come again to our attention. And perhaps this was because now the mental body of the Western seeker and their consciousness is better ready to receive the impression which the sutras bring. So while we live in a world wherein people are constantly seeking these new things, as I said, the sutras give us pause to focus on eternal truths. There are many translations of the sutras, and the Tibetan thought them of such importance that he undertook his own translation from the Sanskrit. And he and Alice Bailey wrote a very insightful commentary. And these translations are embodied in the book, The Light of the Soul. So if you're not familiar with it, I'm sure it's available in the bookstore. Originally, the sutras trained individuals here and there in light of the ancient Indian tradition. But now, because of so many seekers being in need of spiritual training, we're told that the application to these sutras is being applied by groups. And the Tibetan says the results of this training are amazing, have been amazing. And they're helping humanity to play its part in this vast collective work of making our planet sacred, of turning the etheric body from a network of squares into a network of triangles. And we're told that this making of our planet sacred, which is occurring now and over long periods of time, is enabling our logos, our planetary logos, to come into a closer relationship with the solar logos and to be a more effective channel for that solar light. In a certain sense, our logos is becoming at one with a solar being. And that light from the combined logoi is able to penetrate into the consciousness somewhat of the groups forming now. And as I said, the particular aspect of the sutras that I wanted to speak about is that first sutra of the second book. The first book of the Yoga Sutras, it's divided into 4 books. The first book talks about the goal of yoga or union, and the second book talks about how can we achieve that union. The goal is set out in the first sutra of the first book as simply Om, yoga or union. That's the whole goal of the treatise. That's the whole goal of the Raja Yoga path, to achieve union with the soul. But the second book, as I said, gives us the means whereby we can achieve that goal of union. And one of the first items is spiritual reading. Fiery aspiration, devotion to Ishvara, and spiritual reading. And spiritual reading is related more to the mental aspect, using the mind. It has reference to the capacity of the mental body to see back of a symbol, to touch the subject lying back of an object. And eventually it's said that every form comes to be understood as a symbol or the veil of a thought. An astrologer, for example, is someone who uses the symbol of an astrological chart to translate that which is the essence of a person into words that will serve to help the individual on his or her journey back to the soul. The goal of spiritual training is to help us to cease identifying with these outer symbols and to identify instead with the inner reality. And clearly, this is not an easy thing to do, particularly as we move into this 7th ray age when the form, the outer shell, can easily take on too much importance, distracting us from the underlying meaning. But just like learning any new skill, with practice and discipline, new ways of seeing, new ways of understanding, eventually do become possible. To become a spiritual reader, we must come to the understanding that we live in a world of unreality, and that all that we see and experience is distorted by our own perceptions, by our own lens. So we work at harnessing and eventually illumining the mind with the light of the soul, so that this underlying reality can be revealed. And that as the soul illumination occurs, there naturally ensues the ability to read that which lies around with an increasing accuracy, freed from lower disturbances and the separating veils of the astral and lower mental planes. But to free ourselves from distractions is a challenge in today's world. But it does appear that many people, such as those of you who are here today, are beginning to make time for soul culture in the midst of your busy and distracted lives. We're making time to be present, to fast from technology, to share with others. Other hindrances besides the world of distractions that Patanjali pointed out that are hindrances to this art of spiritual reading include too strong a sense of personality, desire, hate, and attachment. These fetters have to be worked at, let go of, so that we can become readers of the subtleties of life. These hindrances have prevented us for eons of time from realizing the reality that we are all sons of God. And when we discover and view these hindrances dispassionately, we might wonder why they are so difficult to cast aside. We know they prevent us from application to the higher truths. Why then do we allow these distractions, this personality, this fear and hatred to hold us and grip us so tightly? Why isn't it easier to let them go? Why are we blindly entering into the far country and, as the Tibetan says, eating the husks of mortal existence? It would seem that the answer to this question could only be found far back in the annals of our ancient history, wherein certain abrogations of the perfect laws given to us by the planet Venus were disregarded by humanity. Hence all the suffering and pain that have kept us locked in this world of unreality. So therefore, it's only through the ability to pierce through the hindrances that we begin to see more clearly and come under the guidance of our soul. Spiritual reading is a practice which moves the seeker through all levels of development. There are different levels of our ability to read, as we know. First, we move to read the symbols of the physical world, the world of effects. Then we move on to reading beneath the world of meaning or causes and come to know reality in a better sense. But eventually, the Tibetan tells us, application to the art of spiritual reading leads to the ability to move into the triadal world of significances. These higher aspects of the art of spiritual reading will enable us at some distant point to read the greatest book that has been written, that book that is the starry heavens itself. The book which we're told contains the entire history of humanity within its symbols, stories, and myths. These heavens were the television of ancient peoples. Are we any better today with our television? As we begin to read the heavens with greater accuracy, we'll begin to penetrate more fully into the mystery and majesty of such alignments as this upcoming festival week. We'll participate more consciously in releasing, therefore, new life onto the earth. But clearly to read and know something of such higher alignments that occur at times such as the festival week and perhaps at the Sirius festival, they're really beyond our capacity to understand at this time. For to read these things accurately involves insight into movements within the vast configuration of stars and cycles of time. These applications are certainly only possible by certain members of the spiritual hierarchy of our planet, and only a fragment of this understanding has trickled down to us at our higher moments. Surely as the new astrology comes into being around the year 2025, the influence of some of the extra-zodiacal constellations will increasingly be brought to the attention of humanity, as Nicholas had highlighted in his presentation. And this will be so because there will be new developments within human consciousness that will enable us to respond more fully, to read more deeply into these powerful and, to us, relatively new influxes of energy. But we do know that the sutras are not studied by humanity alone, such as their greatness, but are instead studied by members of the spiritual hierarchy who have a deeper ability to penetrate into their meaning. And one such sutra, which I'll read, number 28 from Book 3, is certainly one of those sutras that demands a high level of spiritual reading to comprehend. It states, concentration upon the pole star will give knowledge of the orbits of the planets and the stars. In our own way, we can apply ourselves to this concentration upon the pole star as we seek to align ourselves with that which is due north within ourselves. What is the highest point of spiritual tension that we can achieve? The point whereby the energy of the spiritual will can flow into our vehicles and align us to such an extent that we can, as the Tibetan says, accomplish more in one day than is possible in many, many months of effort with a lesser alignment. So we can work with that sutra on our level. Another interesting example of spiritual reading given out in the teachings that's a little closer to us, yet still quite far away, is concerned with the reading ability of the master of a wisdom when he deals with his students. We know that the Tibetan didn't have time to read the writings of his chelas, but we know, he told us, that our words, spoken and written, carry a note. They carry a vibration and a symbolic aspect that is of more importance than their outer form expression. And that the real and underlying motive of our words is revealed by this vibratory impact that each of us releases. The Tibetan wrote of his work of spiritual reading. One perhaps minor aspect of his work is, he said, one glance in the direction of the disciple with the thought in mind of ascertaining the value of his contribution in words serves to bring into my line of vision the symbol which is the product of his written thought. So all of our words coalesce in a symbol. And this symbol is generally quite distorted, lacking in true balance, emanating as it does most oftenly from the astral or lower mental plane levels. So part of our task as we seek to read spiritually is to also clarify our own use of words so as to become better transmitters of our soul's intention. As we know, Freud and Jung encouraged us to read beneath the symbols in dreams. Native peoples and some schools of Vedic astrology have long used a type of spiritual reading to find answers to pressing questions in the lives of people, the meaning behind outer events. They do this by interpreting the naturally occurring happenings surrounding the asking of a question. They observe, for example, the weather at the time, the animals that cross the path, the people and other circumstances that might surround the event. For all these things are thought to convey messages, if read accurately, and bring insight into the deeper meaning and the occult significance of what is happening in the daily life. Alice Bailey was surely a great spiritual reader. For the Tibetan said her greatest service was subjective. And that's quite a statement when you consider all of the outer work that she did. Her greatest service was subjective. Surely her ability to read contributed to her healing ability, for I do believe she was a great healer of souls. She knew how to penetrate beneath the outer shell of an individual or a group and to know what they needed to take their next step. And she was also very skilled, the Tibetan said, at providing protection and deflecting attacks on her work and her group by those of materialistic intention. So clearly, a spiritual reader is not simply someone who reads spiritual books, which was what I thought when I first read it, and I thought, wow, at least I'm accomplishing one aspect of the Yoga Sutras. I read spiritual books. But it's not to say that we should discard that aspect of it, because we who do read the spiritual teachings of the Tibetan know that by our ability to seek to penetrate into the essence of those teachings, that we learn something about making inroads in our own consciousness to the higher aspects of ourselves. So reading the books does involve a capacity for intuitive understanding. And the Tibetan speaks about this, particularly in Rule 14, for disciples and initiates, in the rays and the initiations. He gives an injunction as to how to penetrate more deeply into the ashram through reflection upon certain words. And an example of those words are the words of Rule 14. Know, express, reveal, destroy, resurrect. He said that these words synthesize significances. And he said that when considering these words, that we retreat within ourselves. He's giving us a formula here. Retreat within ourselves and seek to think, feel, and perceive at our highest possible level of consciousness. And he said that effort will bear much fruit and bring rich reward. And that through such pondering, we will begin to respond to triadal impression. He said, quote, "These rules are to be read with the aid of a developing esoteric sense. They're related to group initiation, in spite of their having individual application. They're not what they appear to be on the surface. Trite truisms, spiritual platitudes, but they are instead rules for initiation, which, if followed, will take the disciple and the group through a major spiritual experience. They embody the techniques of the New Age, which necessitates group activity, group procedure, and united action." But this type of spiritual reading, of course, is only possible at rare intervals for most of us, for we work as yet circumscribed within the separating veils, seeing through a glass darkly, and so we live the dual life, as did the sannyasins of old. But as contemporary sannyasins, we live and move within the jungles of the West, the cities of the world. Yet we're asked to maintain our focus, take our direction from the world of subjective realities. And we walk this way with our group brothers. The Tibetan counsels that as we travel this way, to stay within the radius of that light and wander not down the accustomed byways. So that's all I have today.